What happens when the world's richest man secretly pretends to sleep, just to test the son of his maid? He never imagined the shocking truth he would uncover that night. Stay tuned. This story will leave you speechless. In the heart of the city stood a mansion so vast it felt more like a palace than a home. Every corner of it gleamed with gold accents, crystal chandeliers, and marble floors polished until they shone like mirrors. The man who owned it lived surrounded by every luxury money could buy. Yet, despite the wealth, there was no warmth in the house. His employees carried out their duties with careful precision, always speaking softly, always stepping lightly, because they knew he was a man who demanded perfection. His eyes, sharp and cold, seemed to follow them everywhere, a silent reminder that mistakes were not tolerated. Among the staff was a maid who had worked there faithfully for years. She was quiet, humble, and never complained, no matter how demanding the tasks became. Often she had no choice but to bring her young son with her after school. The boy was polite, never ran through the mansion's halls, and never touched what did not belong to him. Still, his curious eyes sometimes lingered on the tall bookshelves, the paintings on the walls, or the glittering objects displayed in glass cases. He was a child, after all, and children were full of questions the silence of the mansion could not answer. The man of the house noticed the boy's curiosity and did not trust it. In his world, wealth attracted greed, and greed lived in everyone. He was certain of that. When he saw the boy glance at his gold watch one evening, he thought to himself, "What if this boy steals? What if he's just waiting for the right moment?" Doubt gnawed at him like a restless shadow. He could not shake the thought that one day he might walk into his study and find something missing. That night, as the household settled into its usual rhythm, he devised a plan. It was simple, but, to him, necessary. He would leave temptation in plain sight and see what the boy would do. If the boy's heart was clean, nothing would happen. But if greed lived inside him, the truth would come out. After dinner, the billionaire moved to the grand living room where velvet curtains were drawn, and a fire glowed faintly in the fireplace. He settled on the long leather couch and placed his most valuable possessions deliberately on the glass table beside him. His watch gleamed under the soft light, his wallet bulged with notes and cards, and his phone rested silently, its screen dark. All three items lay within easy reach, an invitation no thief could ignore. He leaned back against the cushions, adjusted a blanket loosely over himself, and closed his eyes. He slowed his breathing, steady and heavy, mimicking the rhythm of deep sleep. Yet one eye remained slightly open, just enough for him to see through the thin veil of lashes. His ears strained for every sound. In the kitchen, the maid worked as always, humming softly under her breath as she scrubbed a pot. The boy, curious as ever, wandered toward the living room, the soles of his shoes barely making a sound on the polished marble floor. He pushed the door slightly and slipped in, his small figure almost swallowed by the towering shelves and vast furniture. The billionaire's heart quickened. Here it was, the moment of truth. The boy's gaze landed on him first, sprawled on the couch in what looked like careless sleep. Then, slowly, the boy's eyes dropped to the table. The glittering watch caught the light, the wallet lay half open as if daring him, and the sleek phone glimmered like a prize waiting to be claimed. The boy hesitated in the doorway. His head tilted slightly, and he stepped closer. One small step, then another, his eyes fixed on the expensive objects. The billionaire's breath caught in his throat, though he kept the rhythm steady, forcing himself to remain still. His thoughts raced. Yes, here it comes. He can't resist it. No child could. The boy moved closer, the faint creak of the floor beneath his weight echoing in the quiet room. He was close enough now to reach out and take anything he wanted. The billionaire's pulse thundered in his ears, every nerve alert, every muscle tight beneath the blanket. He waited for the small hand to stretch forward, for fingers to curl around the wallet, for the proof that his suspicion had been right all along. But instead, the boy paused. He stood there silently, his eyes moving between the man who slept and the tempting treasures before him. For a long moment, he did nothing at all. His face was unreadable, his thoughts a mystery. The billionaire, peeking through his lashes, froze in anticipation, certain he was about to witness greed reveal itself. The boy took another step forward, slower this time, deliberate. The watch sparkled. The wallet almost called to him. The phone sat waiting. And the boy, with a look of decision crossing his face, finally reached out his hand, and the billionaire beneath his blanket stopped breathing altogether. The billionaire's heart pounded inside his chest as he kept his eyes half closed, his breathing heavy and even, pretending to be lost in sleep. He was certain now that the boy's small hand would soon reach out and curl around the wallet, that curiosity and greed would finally break through the mask of innocence. He waited for the sound of paper sliding, the faint scrape of metal as the watch was lifted, the tiny shuffle of a guilty step backward. But nothing happened. Instead, the boy froze in front of the table, his gaze flickering from the glittering possessions to the man stretched out before him. For a long moment, he did nothing at all. Then his eyes softened and his attention shifted. He noticed the blanket that had slipped from the man's shoulders and hung uselessly near his waist. The room was cool, the fire in the fireplace nearly gone, its embers barely glowing. The boy looked at the man with the faintest trace of concern, then carefully reached down, pinched the edge of the blanket between his small fingers, and lifted it gently. Slowly, as if afraid of waking him, he drew the blanket back over the man's shoulders, smoothing it across his chest so it covered him properly. It was the kind of gesture a son might do for his father, not the action of someone planning to steal. The billionaire, hidden behind the mask of slumber, felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected that. His mind, so used to suspicion, had no explanation for kindness this simple, this quiet. He forced himself to remain still, his body stiff beneath the blanket now warmed by the boy's careful hands. Then the boy's eyes wandered again, and he spotted something else. A glass of water rested near the edge of the table, tipped slightly, so that a thin stream had spilled down the side. A small puddle was spreading on the polished wood. The boy frowned at the mess, glanced at the man to make sure he did not wake, and then turned quickly on his heel. His shoes padded softly across the marble as he slipped into the kitchen. A moment later, he returned with a folded cloth. Without hesitation, he leaned down and dabbed the spill until every trace of water was gone, wiping carefully so the table shone once more. Then, as though trained by habit, he set the glass upright, neatly aligned with the edge of the table. The billionaire's chest ached with confusion. This was not what he had prepared himself to see. He had left temptation in plain sight, and yet the boy's first thoughts were not of taking, but of helping, of protecting comfort, of cleaning messes that were not his responsibility. Still, his eyes stayed half-closed, his body unmoving. For he wanted to see how far this would go. The boy straightened and glanced once more at the table. The gold watch reflected the firelight, a gleaming circle of power. The wallet rested half-open, a corner of money visible. The phone, sleek and expensive, carried the glow of wealth in its silence. The boy stood over them, staring for a long time, his young face thoughtful. The billionaire held his breath again. Perhaps this was it. Perhaps now the temptation would be too strong to resist. But the boy did not move toward them. Instead, he slipped a hand into his worn school bag and pulled out a small notebook with a pencil tucked inside the pages. He sat down quietly on the edge of a chair near the table, laid the notebook across his knees, and began to write. The pencil scratched softly, a gentle sound in the silent room. At first, it was only numbers and shapes, then tiny diagrams that looked like wheels and gears, little machines taking shape on the paper. Words followed, notes about an invention he dreamed of building one day, plans for something bigger than himself. The billionaire, pretending still to sleep, felt something stir inside him he could not name. He had been waiting to catch greed, but what he saw instead was ambition, raw and unpolished, belonging to a child with nothing yet daring to dream of everything. The boy leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration, completely unaware of the fortune lying just inches from his hand. His mind was not on money, but on possibility. His heart was not drawn to stealing, but to creating. For minutes the boy sketched, his pencil moving quickly, erasing, redrawing. His lips moved silently, whispering ideas to himself. Finally, when the page filled with lines and notes, he closed the notebook gently and looked at the man again. There was no resentment in his eyes, no envy, only a quiet determination that seemed too old for someone so young. He set the notebook carefully on the table, close to the man's hand, as if leaving behind a piece of himself. Then he leaned forward, so close that the billionaire could feel the faint warmth of his breath. In a whisper, barely louder than a sigh, the boy spoke softly, words meant for no one but the sleeping man. "One day, I'll build something big, enough so Mama never has to clean again. One day, I'll make her proud." The words slipped into the billionaire's ears like an arrow. They sank deep, piercing through layers of suspicion and arrogance, cutting through the coldness he carried. His eyes stung, though he forced them to remain shut. For so long he had believed that everyone around him only cared for his wealth, that greed lived in every soul. Yet here was a child, standing in his mansion, whispering dreams of dignity and love instead of theft. The boy straightened, his task complete. Without touching the watch, the wallet, or the phone, he turned quietly and walked toward the door. His footsteps were soft, careful, carrying no trace of guilt. He slipped out of the room and disappeared down the hallway, leaving behind nothing but his notebook and his whispered promise. The billionaire, still lying motionless on the couch, could not keep his eyes shut any longer. Slowly they opened, wide with shock and disbelief. His heart thundered, not from suspicion now, but from something far deeper. He stared at the table, at the untouched possessions, at the small notebook resting like a treasure beside them. The words the boy had whispered replayed in his mind again and again, refusing to fade. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt frozen, not by anger, but by the overwhelming truth of what he had just witnessed. That night, long after, the staff had left and silence wrapped around the mansion like a heavy curtain. The billionaire lay awake in his vast bedroom, staring at the ornate ceiling above him. Sleep would not come. His mind replayed the scene again and again, the boy's small hand pulling the blanket over his shoulders, the careful way he wiped away the spilled water, the notebook filled with sketches, and finally, those whispered words that pierced deeper than any accusation could. "One day, I'll build something big enough so Mama never has to clean again." The words clung to him like a weight he could not shake. For a man who believed every soul could be bought, who trusted only in the loyalty that money purchased, the boy's innocence felt like a contradiction to everything he thought he knew. He turned over, restless. He had left wealth on the table, wealth that could change a poor family's life instantly. Yet the boy had not reached for it. Instead, he dreamed of building his own future, of lifting his mother with the strength of his own hands. The billionaire pressed his palm against his chest, feeling the rapid thud of his heart. For the first time in years, he questioned his certainty about people. Perhaps not everyone was driven by greed. Perhaps there was something else, something he had long forgotten existed. By morning, curiosity gnawed at him like hunger. He needed, to be sure. One act of restraint could have been luck, or fear, or the careful teaching of a cautious mother. But if the boy faced temptation again, would his choice be the same? The billionaire decided to find out. That afternoon, when the maid, arrived with her son, the mansion hummed with its usual order. The boy sat quietly in the kitchen while his mother busied herself with dishes, polishing silver and scrubbing counters until they gleamed. The billionaire excused himself with a calm nod and retreated into his private study, a room no one else was allowed to enter. It was a sanctuary of wealth, floor-to-ceiling shelves stacked with rare books, sculptures and artifacts collected from around the world, and drawers filled with neat stacks of cash for business dealings. It was a place that could tempt even the strongest heart. He left the door slightly ajar. For years he had ensured it was always locked, always secure, but today, by design, the lock clicked only halfway. He stepped inside, adjusted a few items to make their value obvious, and then quietly left again, pulling the door until it rested open just enough for a curious child to notice. What the boy did not know was that hidden cameras lined the corners of the study. Every angle was covered, every movement recorded. The billionaire settled into his office nearby, a screen before him displaying the empty study, waiting for the moment when the boy's curiosity would lead him inside. Minutes passed. Then the boy appeared on the screen, his small frame slipping quietly through the door, his eyes wide as he stepped into the forbidden space. The billionaire leaned closer, his pulse rising. The boy glanced around, his gaze falling first on the glimmering objects arranged on tables, ornate vases, a golden compass, a jeweled box. His eyes shifted to the drawers slightly open, edges of cash visible in neat stacks. The billionaire's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. Now, he thought, now the truth will come out. But the boy did not reach for the money. Instead, his eyes wandered upward, to the towering shelves of books that covered the walls. He stepped closer, tilting his head back, his mouth slightly open in awe at the sight of so many volumes, leather-bound, aged, filled with knowledge he had never touched before. Slowly, carefully, he extended his hand, not toward the gold or the cash, but toward a book. He pulled it from the shelf, ran his fingers across its spine, and then carried it to the chair near the desk. He sat down, opened it with reverence, and began to read. His small lips moved silently as he traced the lines of text with his finger, his eyes shining with interest and wonder. On the screen, the billionaire watched, stunned. He had prepared himself to see greed once again. But what he saw instead was hunger of another kind, the hunger for knowledge. The boy was not interested in what wealth could buy. He was captivated by what knowledge could make him become. For nearly half an hour, the boy remained in the study, lost in the world of the book, flipping pages carefully as though afraid to damage something so valuable. When his mother called for him from the kitchen, he startled, closed the book quickly and returned it to the shelf with careful precision, exactly where it had been. Then he hurried out, leaving behind the treasures untouched. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, his throat dry, his eyes fixed on the now empty study displayed on the screen. He could not deny it. Twice now he had left temptation within the boy's reach, and twice the boy had chosen differently. Not once had he reached for money or possessions. Instead, he had revealed a heart drawn toward kindness, dignity, and learning. Later that evening, when the maid finished her work and called for her son, the billionaire stood at the edge of the hallway, watching them leave. His gaze lingered on the boy. For years, his eyes had been cold, hard, searching for flaws in everyone around him. But tonight, something softened in his stare. The maid noticed and looked back at him nervously, unsure why he studied her child so intently. But the billionaire said nothing, only gave the faintest nod, as though acknowledging something only he understood. That night, alone once more in his grand house, he walked slowly into his study, closed the door, and stood before the shelves of books the boy had admired. He ran his fingers along the spines, pulling out the very volume the boy had opened. He imagined the small hands turning the pages, the eager eyes absorbing every word. he thought again of the whispered promise from the night before, a promise not of greed, but of building a future. The billionaire lowered himself into the chair where the boy had sat and placed the book before him. His reflection shimmered faintly in the polished surface of the desk, and for the first time in years, he did not see only the face of a man hardened by wealth. He saw the image of someone confronted by truth. Truth revealed not in words spoken to him, but in choices made when he thought no one was watching. He closed the book gently, his decision already forming in the silence. The boy had passed both tests, not by resisting greed, but by proving there had never been greed inside him at all. Instead, there was kindness, responsibility, ambition, things money could never buy. And so the billionaire resolved, in the quiet of that night, that he would not let this child's dreams wither. He would change his life forever. The following week, the mansion carried its usual stillness, the air heavy with routine, yet something within the man of the house had shifted. He stood in the grand hall as the maid arrived with her son, their figures small against the towering marble pillars. She moved as she always did, quiet and efficient, her eyes lowered, her hands busy. The boy walked in beside her, his school bag slung over his shoulder, his gaze sweeping across the room with the same wonder that had caught the billionaire's attention before. But today, instead of turning away with his usual cold indifference, the man watched them closely, a different light flickering in his eyes. When the boy settled at the corner of the room, pulling out his notebook as he often did to pass the time. While his mother worked, the billionaire cleared his throat. The sound startled them both. The maid froze mid-step, unsure if something was wrong, while the boy looked up nervously, clutching his pencil. The billionaire took a slow step forward, his voice calm but deliberate. He asked the boy about the notebook he always carried, about the sketches he filled its pages with when he thought no one was paying attention. The boy hesitated, shy under the weight of the man's stare. For a moment he seemed ready to close the notebook and hide it away, as though his dreams had no place in a house built by another man's fortune. But then, with a timid breath, he opened the pages. His small finger traced the lines of his drawings as he spoke. He explained that he wanted to be an engineer, that he dreamed of building machines that could help people. Machines that could carry heavy loads so his mother would never have to exhaust herself. Machines that could clean faster than hands ever could. Machines that could make life easier for those who worked too hard and had too little. His voice shook at first, but the more he described his ideas, the more his words carried a spark of excitement, a flame of determination. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt something stir in him that he thought had long died. A smile, warm and unforced, spread across his face. The boy's innocence, his vision, his simple hope for a better life, touched something deeper than money ever had. He told the boy in a low voice, steady with sincerity, "Dreams like yours deserve more than just paper." Then, as the maid looked on in confusion, he motioned to one of his assistants who entered carrying neatly wrapped packages. The boy blinked in surprise as the billionaire handed them to him. Inside were advanced books on engineering and design, a sleek laptop, and a letter sealed with the emblem of the city's most prestigious school. The billionaire announced that a scholarship had been arranged for him, covering every expense, opening a path to the education he needed to turn those sketches into reality. The boy's mouth fell open, his small hands trembling as he held the laptop against his chest. The maid gasped, her body stiffening as tears welled in her eyes. She had never expected kindness here, only wages in exchange for endless work. She could not understand why the richest man she had ever known suddenly cared about her son's future. Overcome, she pressed her hand to her face, her tears spilling freely as her son looked up at her with wide, hopeful eyes. The billionaire stood tall, his expression no longer cold, but filled with something unfamiliar even to himself. He confessed what he had done. He told them how he had tested the boy, How he had pretended to sleep while leaving his possessions in reach. How he had left his study door open with treasures inside. His voice did not carry pride, but shame. "I wanted to see if greed lived in his heart," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the boy. "Instead, I found honesty, kindness, and vision." He passed a test I myself would have failed. The maid's tears deepened, but this time they carried both relief and gratitude. She clutched her son's shoulders tightly as though protecting him even while his future unfolded before them. The boy only nodded softly, his eyes shining, not with arrogance but with quiet determination. In that moment, the walls of the mansion seemed to shift. The cold air that had always filled it warmed, with the weight of transformation. The billionaire, who had built his empire by suspicion, control, and distrust, felt his arrogance melt away beneath the strength of a child's simple goodness. From that day forward, he no longer looked at his employees as shadows moving through his house, but as people whose dignity deserved respect. He greeted them with humanity, offered them fairer treatment, and carried himself with a humility that had once been absent. The boy, meanwhile, carried his new books and laptop with pride, his sketches growing more complex, his ideas sharper. The mansion that had once been a symbol of wealth became, in part, a place of learning and encouragement for him. And though the billionaire had given him tools and opportunity, he knew deep inside that the boy had given him far more, a lesson he could never buy. As the days passed, the household felt the change. The man who had been feared was now approached, with ease. The staff who had once moved silently now carried smiles, and the maid, who had spent her life scrubbing the world of others, saw her son walk steadily toward a life where his hands would build, not clean. The story closed not with riches displayed, but with a truth uncovered. Sometimes the smallest test reveals the greatest truth, and sometimes it takes the innocence of a child to remind even the wealthiest man that character shines brightest when no one is watching.